We're going to begin this news hour in Sudan, where there's been no let-up in the fighting between the army and paramilitary rapid support forces as they battle for control of crucial areas in Khartoum. This is despite indirect talks happening in Saudi Arabia, but neither side appears willing to back down. Freddie Carr begins our coverage.
Sudan's army chief, Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, inspecting troops at the headquarters in Khartoum. It's a rare public appearance for the general, his third since fighting between the army and paramilitary rapid support forces began in mid-April. The battle for control of Sudan shows no sign of ending. On Wednesday, army supporters demonstrated in Port Sudan. They're demanding United Nations envoy Volker Perthes leave, accusing him of interference.
We demand that Volker, the UN envoy, be removed from his position. He is responsible for the conflict because he has contributed to the division and separation of the people in this country.
Both the army and rapid support forces have claimed control of strategic sites in Khartoum this week. And both insist they have the upper hand. The two have been holding indirect talks in Jeddah since the beginning of the month, but they've failed to agree on a permanent resolution. A series of ceasefires have failed.
Burhan gives a statement that the truce will be from this hour to that hour. The continued air raids and artillery fire is proof that there is more than one decision maker in this crisis, and it's one of the reasons that the hostilities don't end. It proves the lack of will from the Sudanese army.
And for Sudanese, more stalled negotiations means more uncertainty and more hardship and suffering.
People are leaving Khartoum because there's no food, no water, no electricity, and there is very high levels of insecurity. WFP is providing hot meals. WFP will continue to support refugees as and when they arrive. But the future is very bleak for those people. It is bleak for Sudan, and it is bleak for the region.
More than a month into the conflict, the UN says 1 million people have been displaced. They can't go home until the two sides agree to stop fighting. Freddie Carr, Al Jazeera.
Hiba Morgan's joining us live from Omdurman. What's the latest on the fighting in Khartoum and the surrounding areas, Hiba?
Well, there has been several airstrikes launched by the Sudanese army against several supposed positions of the rapid support forces. Now, it started in the early hours of Thursday here in the city of Omdurman, around an area known as Karari, which is not far from the military airbase, where the fighter jets that have been targeting the positions of the rapid support forces have been taking off from. Now, the army says that they know that the RSF has been trying to target that base to neutralize its air force, but they say that they're putting their defenses around that area to ensure that their airbase is protected. There's also been airstrikes in the northern part of the capital, Khartoum, in the city of Bahri, and that's because of the heavy presence of the rapid support forces troops in that city. We also spoke to residents in the southern part of the capital, Khartoum, and they say that the rapid support forces attacked the Central Reserve Police. Now, these are the militarized unit of the police, and the residents in that area say that the RSF were pushed back and that several of their technicals were captured by the Central Reserve Police. So it looks like on the ground fighting is continuing, despite the fact that the two sides are holding talks in Jeddah in Saudi Arabia to try to work out a ceasefire.
Yeah, Hiba, I want to ask you about those talks because they are indirect talks. The two sides aren't speaking face to face, as it were. Do we know what's happening with those negotiations?
Well, both Saudi Arabia and the United States, who are mediating these talks, these indirect talks between the rapid support forces and the Sudanese army, are trying to get the two sides to agree on one basic thing, which is a ceasefire for humanitarian aid to be able to come into Khartoum for those who are in need, as well as for civilians who are trapped in the capital, unable to leave because of the ongoing fighting, to be able to make it to safer zones. So far, the two sides cannot agree on a ceasefire. We also heard from the advisor of the rapid support forces commander in the South Sudanese capital, Juba, talking about a ceasefire, saying that his commander, General Mohammed Hamdan Hamdan Dagalo is ready to speak to the Army Commander General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan to reach some kind of an agreement, but that has to start with a ceasefire on the ground. And so far, that's one thing, that's the main thing that the two sides cannot agree upon. They cannot agree upon a mechanism to enforce that ceasefire, especially when several ceasefires have been violated before. They cannot agree on a mechanism to ensure that humanitarian aid is delivered to the people here in the capital, Khartoum, and other parts of the country. And they are holding indirect talks, mediators trying to get the two sides to reach some kind of consensus. But so far, that's proving challenging.
Hiba Morgan in Omdurman. Hiba, thank you very much. Well, the conflict's been forcing Sudanese people out of their homes for decades. Refugees from previous wars who settled in neighbouring Chad are now welcoming the latest wave of people fleeing the fighting. Zain Basravi has more from Borota camp in eastern Chad.
The best way to understand how bad the conflict is in Sudan is perhaps to hear directly from refugees.
Many people have lost their lives. Today, Al Janaina has been transformed into hell. I want the United Nations to intervene. We don't live like people. We're not eating properly. We don't have health services. We can't bear any more of this.
Mustafa, a teacher, says his country is no longer a functioning state. At the Borota displacement camp in Chad, one after another refugee gives accounts of running away from large groups of armed men who roam the countryside terrorizing civilians. Most here are women and children, particularly vulnerable to kidnapping and sexual violence.
The war is really bad. A child still being breastfed can be killed alongside his mother. His father can be killed. There is nothing good about war.
Witness to death, they arrive traumatized, especially the youngest.
We have to move them from the border area to the safer place, as well as we have to move them where they can have all the assistance and services, such as a school that a lot of parents mention about, that they want to send their children to schools, as well as health services that they can access.
Aid groups say it's a race against time. Rains will come, the camp will flood, and this remote area will become inaccessible.
We were here just a few days ago, and there are already signs that this camp is getting bigger and people are adapting to their circumstances. This is a makeshift market right in the middle of this dry riverbed. You can buy food, shoes, fruits, flashlights, charge your cell phone. You can get soaps and biscuits, really anything people might immediately need. The other sign that this camp is changing, that it's getting bigger, is that there are now makeshift tents on both banks of the river.
Attempting to bring order to the chaos, the UN has started relocating people. At a camp in Gaga, the newly arrived are welcomed by neighbors in a unique position to empathize. Sudanese displaced from the same villages by the war in Darfur in 2003. Perhaps finding some solace in seeing life goes on. Living without fear of attack is possible, and children can go back to school. Something that will come as a comfort to one teacher with a message to the warring sides in Khartoum. What you are doing has killed thousands, he says. Silence the guns. Stop the war. Zain Basravi, Al Jazeera, Borota, Eastern Chad.